I mentioned that you should try to, in general, avoid the interspersed script that tends to clutter pages and ends up creating code that is difficult to maintain and understand over time. But I haven't shown you how to avoid it yet. So let's move now towards the preferred model of dynamic content in ASP.NET Pages. And that model comes from the server-side controls in ASP.NET. So the way these work is any control on your page that is marked with the run@= server attribute. And this can literally be any HTML element if you want. You can turn anything you want to in a server-side control. Or it could be one of the specially defined server-side web controls that ASP.NET provides for you. And what this will do is it will give you a server-side member variable of a particular type associated with that control that is going to be added to your class definition. So that class that we saw that was automatically generated from the ASPX file is going to be augmented with a new member variable of a specific type that you can then programmatically access on the server instead of having to intersperse script notation to generate dynamic content. You can actually programmatically manipulate the objects that are added to your class definition. And this gives you a much cleaner way of generating content dynamically and having it rendered to the client without having to clutter the markup on your page. And there is one other thing to be aware of, and we'll talk more about this later, which is the fact that the state for these server-side controls is implicitly maintained across post requests back to the same page. So we'll discuss that more later, but it's important to keep in mind as we start working with these features. Okay, so we're going to go back and revisit our page, but this time what we're going to do is take out some of that server-side script that we had and try to replace it with server-side controls that we interacted with dynamically in our actual class. So I'll follow this example that you see on the slide here in our sample application. Let's go ahead and switch back to that. And I have the code from the slide down here on the right, and I'm going to inject that into our page. So let me change a couple of things here. First of all, let's get rid of this dynamically generated list. Okay, so this list right here, which had all of the interspersed script notation, I'm going to replace that with a server-side control definition called a bulleted list. Okay, so there's my bulleted list, like so. And I'm doing using a technique that's fairly common in ASP.NET, which is to populate the server-side control with some sample content, even though this content is not ever actually going to be displayed because I'm going to replace it on the server. It's not a bad idea to include some sample content so that when someone's looking at this page through a designer, they see a representation of what it will look like eventually. Okay, so what I've done is I'm using an ASP.NET server-side control called a bulleted list, which in fact will render an unordered list, which is what I just replaced. And I now need to add the server-side code that's going to populate it. And what I'm going to do is actually override a virtual function called onload that I inherit from the page base class. And we'll come back and show you where that comes from in more detail in a few slides. And what I'm going to do is take advantage of the fact that this control, the bulleted list, was added as a member variable to my class definition, and the identifier is going to be the same as the ID that I specified on the markup element. So I can refer to that control just by specifying or using the underscore display list variable here. And I happen to know this list. You could look up the definition for bulleted list to find out all of the properties that it exposed, but I know that it exposes an items property which contains all of the default items that will have been injected there. And I will clear those out first, and then I'm going to iterate across my collection up here, the item count, just like I did before. And instead of printing directly to the response, I'm going to construct a new instance of a list item class, give it the content of the calling this getDisplayItem function, and this will result in an unordered list that contains all these items dynamically injected as we did before. So let's try running that page now, which should look fundamentally the same, although we've changed the implementation a bit. Of course, there's one exception here. Anytime you're using server-side controls in ASP.NET, they typically need to be in a form element with the run@server attribute set on it, which you'll find quickly if you forget, as we did here. All right, let's try that one more time. Okay, so there's my items rendered just like before. And again, let's go take a brief look at the class definition so we can sort of see how that changed with the addition of the server-side control. So I'm going to scroll down to the class definition again. Here it is. And you'll notice right at the very top there, the server-side control display list was added as a protected member variable to my class definition of type bulleted list in the System Web UI Web Controls namespace. And as I interacted with that member variable down here, that's what it ended up referring to. Okay, so server-side controls are turned into member variables on the class definition, and I could very easily have gone in here and replaced these other server-side elements with server-side controls instead of using the markup as we did before. But I'll leave it at that for now.